The salt air of the shipyard was a permanent resident in Elias Thorne's lungs, a bitter reminder of the 12-hour shifts that were slowly eroding his soul. As he stepped out of the industrial gates, his joints groaned in protest, matching the rhythmic creak of the rusted cranes behind him. His hands, perpetually stained with oil and grit, were tucked deep into the pockets of a jacket that had long since lost its ability to ward off the damp chill of the city. Elias was a man defined by his exhaustion, a father whose only motivation was the fragile heartbeat of his daughter, Clara, and the mountain of medical bills that threatened to bury them both. He walked through streets where the rain didn't cleanse. It only amplified the despair. The neon signs of the industrial district flickered with a dying buzz, casting long, distorted shadows across the cracked pavement. Every puddle he stepped in reflected the past due notices that currently cluttered his kitchen table, red-inked reminders of a life he could no longer afford. The cold was a constant companion, biting through his worn-out boots as he navigated the labyrinth of alleyways toward his cramped apartment. He was a ghost moving through a city that had forgotten how to be kind, a man whose hope had been traded for the simple necessity of survival. Just as he reached the corner of his block, the atmosphere shifted. A sleek, unmarked black sedan purred to a stop beside him, its headlights cutting through the mist like the eyes of a predator. The door opened with a soft, expensive click, and a man stepped into the rain. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place amidst the grime of the shipyard. This was the man known only as the architect. He didn't offer a handshake or a greeting. Instead, he held a heavy leather briefcase and a digital timer that pulsed with a sharp, crimson glow, its numbers ready to begin a final descent. "Elias Thorne," the man said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain with a chilling clarity. "I am here to offer you an exit." He opened the briefcase to reveal two distinct choices. On one side lay $10,000 in cold, hard cash, the bills neatly banded and smelling of promise. On the other side sat a thick legal contract, embossed with a gold seal, promising a payment of $1 million exactly 10 years from this very moment. It was the ultimate test of human nature, the relief of the present against the security of a future he might not live to see. Elias stared at the money, his breath hitching. 5 seconds. "Elias?" the architect whispered, his thumb hovering over the start button on the timer. The countdown began instantly. 5. Elias's mind raced through the reality of his life, the rent that was late, the medicine Clara needed by tomorrow, and the crushing weight of the debt collector's threats. 4. He tried to imagine $1 million, but it felt like a fairy tale, a distant star he could never reach. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. 3. The hunger in his stomach and the cold in his bones screamed for the immediate comfort of the cash. 2. Elias's hand trembled as he looked at the money. $10,000 wouldn't change his life forever, but it would change his life tonight. 1. Elias lunged forward, his fingers closing around the cash. The architect drove away, leaving a card behind. It said, "You chose the present. Survive the future." Elias ran home, only to find his front door kicked in. He burst into Clara's room, where a shadow waited, holding the very contract he had just walked away from, its golden seal shining like a curse in the dim, flickering light of the broken hallway lamp in this very moment. The $10,000 vanished like mist in the morning fog. It felt like a fortune in that rain-slicked alley, but the reality of debt was a ravenous beast. Within 90 days, the cash was gone, consumed by Clara's surgery fees, predatory back rent, and mundane costs of survival. Elias stood once more on the industrial docks, his hands cracked, realizing he had traded an empire for a momentary reprieve. The relief had been a fleeting shadow, leaving him with only the bitter taste of regret that curdled in his stomach whenever he looked at his daughter. He was back to square one, but with a heavier soul. The architect didn't disappear with the black sedan. He became a ghost in Elias's peripheral vision. Elias saw the charcoal suit in news reports and spotted the man's calculated silhouette amidst rush-hour crowds. The choice hadn't been a simple experiment. It was an initiation into a game Elias didn't comprehend. He felt eyes on him at the shipyard, sensing every groan of exhaustion was being logged by an invisible accountant. His life was no longer his own. It was a data point on a corporate ledger, a specimen being studied for its breaking point. In a flickering laundromat, Elias met Sarah. Her eyes held the same haunted vacancy he felt. Unlike Elias, Sarah had chosen the $1 million 10 years ago. She was now in the final months of her wait, living in terminal decay. Her clothes were rags, her apartment a fortress of paranoid whispers. "They don't just give it to you," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "They watch you rot. They want to see if you'll break before the clock strikes 0. Sarah explained the monitoring was actually a series of cruel psychological stress tests designed to crush the spirit. The horror deepened when Clara mentioned the nice man who watched her at school. She described a figure in a black suit who asked if she wanted her father to be happy. Elias felt a cold terror that the shipyard's winter couldn't match. The architect was no longer watching from a distance. He was encroaching on the one thing Elias tried to protect. The realization hit him like a blow. By taking the $10,000, he hadn't bought safety. He had invited a predator into their home, turning his daughter's future into a bargaining chip for a debt he could never repay. The black sedan returned, idling outside the shipyard gates. The architect didn't step out. He simply rolled down the window. "A mistake can be rectified, Elia," he said. "I can offer a switch. Sarah's contract for your freedom. Bring me her papers, and your debt is erased." The temptation was a serpent coiling around Elias's heart. He looked at his oil-stained hands and thought of Clara's future. Resentment flared into a dark fire. He began to track Sarah through the neon-lit underbelly, a predator born of desperation, looking for a way to undo his past choice. Elias broke into Sarah's apartment during the night, heart-hammering. He expected to find the gold-sealed contract. Instead, his flashlight landed on a wall covered in hundreds of photographs. They weren't of Sarah's family. Every single photo was of him. Elias at the shipyard, Elias at the hospital, Elias holding the cash. Sarah wasn't a fellow victim. She was a sentinel, an observer hired by the hedge fund to monitor his moral decline. She had been documenting his descent into desperation since the very moment he took the money from the architect's hand. Sarah stepped into the room, light switch sounding like a gunshot. She held an old, reel-to-reel recorder. "You were never the first," she whispered. She pressed play. A voice filled the room, his father sobbing as he made the same choice years ago. The recording revealed the $1 million was a curse that destroyed their bloodline for decades. Elias just triggered the final phase of the cycle, unveiling a legacy of debt he could never escape. 10 years is a long time to live in the cold shadow of a choice, but Elias Thorne used every single day of that decade to sharpen his resolve. He did not simply survive the shipyard. He became a ghost within its complex machinery. While the architect's organization watched him, waiting for the moment he would crumble under the weight of his debt of character, Elias was rebuilding a life that no algorithm could predict. Through back-breaking labor and relentless discipline, he provided for Clara without their tainted gold. He watched the cycles of the rain-slicked city and realized that the game was rigged by design. Clara was no longer the frail child in a hospital bed. She was a vibrant young woman, her laughter the only currency that mattered. Yet, as the 10th anniversary approached, the air grew heavy with an old dread. The debt wasn't settled. It had merely been maturing. The black sedan returned on a Tuesday, idling silently in front of Elias's home. He walked toward the vehicle with the steady gait of a man who had already faced his worst nightmares. He was driven away from the docks and into the shimmering heart of the metropolis, to a high-rise of glass and steel that pierced the clouds like a needle. Inside the penthouse, the architect waited. But the man was different, merely a vessel for something far larger. The room was dominated by shimmering holographic displays, a pulsing nexus of data that calculated human misery. The architect was revealed as the interface for an AI-driven hedge fund that treated the human soul as a commodity. Every choice Elias had made was a variable in an equation designed to maximize profit for an elite class that thrived on desperation. The 10,000 was never a gift, Elias, the architect said, his voice synthesized through the room's speakers. It was a debt of character. You unknowingly signed away the rights to your daughter's future earnings. The screens flickered, displaying Clara's academic records and projected career paths. By taking the immediate cash, Elias had accepted the terms of the interest. The organization owned her potential before she even understood labor. They had bet on his hunger, and they believed they had won. The architect gestured to a suitcase containing $1 million, offered now as a final bribe for Elias to stay silent and walk away, leaving the cycle intact for the next victim. Elias didn't look at the money. Instead, he pulled out a small, battered digital drive. "I spent 10 years at the shipyard," Elias said, his voice echoing with a quiet power. "I didn't just move steel. I used the survival skills I learned by being poor to outmaneuver you. I watched your ships, your logistics, and your hidden accounts. I documented every bribe and every life you dismantled." He revealed that he hadn't been a passive victim. He had been a silent architect of their destruction. He had spent a decade gathering evidence of the fund's illegal manipulation of the economy. He wasn't there to trade Clara's freedom for $1 million. He was there to burn the entire system down. With a deliberate movement, Elias struck a match. He didn't need to burn the drive. The data had already been uploaded to federal investigators an hour ago. Instead, he took the gold-sealed contract the architect had produced and held it to the flame. He watched the paper blacken and curl into nothingness, choosing his integrity and his daughter's freedom over the wealth that would have enslaved them. The $1 million remained untouched on the table, a pile of paper that no longer held any power over him. Integrity was a currency the algorithm could never calculate. Elias walked out of the high-rise as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, a herald of the organization's collapse. Back in his small kitchen, the past due notices were a memory of a different life. Clara sat across from him, the morning sun illuminating the peace they had fought to secure. "Do you ever regret it, Dad?" she asked gently. "The $1 million? We could have been rich." Elias looked at his daughter, free and beholden to no one. "I spent $10,000 to learn that you can't put a price on the next 10 years, he replied, a knowing smile touching his lips. That evening, Elias stood on a familiar street corner. A black sedan slowed down near a young man clutching a medical bill. Before the door could open, Elias stepped out of the shadows, placing a grounding hand on the stranger's shoulder. The cycle was broken.